How much do you really know about your city? The names on its street signs and old buildings are clues to a vast treasure of lost stories and history seldom spoken of. Today, as you sit in your car at a stoplight, or lay on the couch watching television, look around. 100 years ago, somebody stood in the very spot which you are currently inhabiting, and life was vastly different. Why should anyone care, you ask? Well, think about this, my friend. 100 years into the future, somebody will be standing right where you are. What will life in your city look like then? The curious resident would do well to study the past, for as we all know, everything is connected.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
Hi, welcome to Time Traveler's first show of the new year. Here we are back at the Brown Hoist. A little bit different than it was the last time we were here in the summer when I was in my shorts. It's just as impressive. Look at that beautiful thing down there. She's been out here in this snow and this ice now for over 100 years, and she's still out here doing it, so I guess we can do it too. The premise to this show is going to be revisiting 3 of our earlier shows, the one on the Masonic document, the 3rd Street Bridge, and then the Brown Hoist episode, just to show the things that has happened since then and the feedback from the citizens of Bay City that were interested in it and came with their stories and their pictures. And just for instance, in the first episode with the Masonic document, I've had 3 or 4 people come in asking about relatives. And in some cases we haven't found them, but in at least 2 cases we found very important. Member number 45, I know all about him now, William Mitchell, because his great-great-great-great-granddaughter came in and told me about it. And she was happy and proud and wanted to see more. And she might. Then on the second show, Al Flood, an old-time sea mariner, showed up and told me all about the Iron Bridge phase of the 3rd Street Bridge. The lost phase, I never knew about it. Now I know about the Iron Bridge phase, and I have a picture of it. And then, of course, on the Brown Hoist, the 3rd show, I've gotten so many stories and anecdotes, and it's just wonderful, some of the things. Just a lot of neat things that have been generated by those first few shows. And I think we owe it to Bay City, and we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to history to revisit these things and gain from the knowledge that we've pulled out of the woodwork again. We are on the north side of the east side bridge abutment of the old 3rd Street Bridge, originally the Bay City Bridge. Well, here we are. We're standing next to the old 3rd Street Bridge abutment. It changed quite a bit. It's now the middle of January. If you remember back then, and we had the beautiful stratigraphy of the old limestone part over here from the quarries in Bayport, and then we had the Charity Island, smaller pieces of limestone up over in this direction, and we had the cobbles up on top, and over here we had the beautiful Art Deco cement bridge abutment that was up over here, right where this piece of cement, that's basically where the edge of the actual bridge was. And before we had man-made industrial stratigraphy, but it was archaic, it was antique, it was historic, and this is industrial stratigraphy. You remember when we were up on the bridge in that first segment on the 3rd Street Bridge, we caught it just in time when the last few rails were left and some of the cobbles that on the bridge approach, and we pointed out the rails and the small gauge and where they were, and we pointed out the fact that the cobbles were in a running block pattern instead of the herringbone. And to show you what alternative history can do, we'll go up there for a second and we'll show you what they did. Well, here we are up on top. You can see the top of the waterfall over there with the nice stones. And this is the really neat and interesting thing. Even though they finished the whole deck, as you see over here, they put the original cobbles down around in the right pattern, in the running course pattern, instead of the herringbone, which is the decorative pattern. So in other words, they took a little space right here. It's like a window into what it used to look like, because this is right where the tracks were that went over the bridge. So in the middle of all of this industrial stratigraphy, they put the final memorial to the bridge right here where everybody could see it, right in front of everything. That's probably the best interpretive thing I've seen Bay City do in a long time. And here's another great example of the wonderful feedback that you get from people, and there's a great story involved in here. What you see here is a milking stool made out of wood from the 3rd Street Bridge. And what you see up here is a collection of newspaper articles from the late 70s, within 3 or 4 years after the bridge collapsed, showing an ad for the furniture, an ad with photographs of all the different pieces of furniture, the milking stools, the benches, and how they were made from the salvaged wood by the handicapped in Bay City. It was a wonderful idea, and they made this quality furniture. And it is quality furniture. If you look at it, it's massive, it's heavy, it's sturdy, it doesn't rock. Right here on the end, it has a plate that mentions, it says, Bay City, Michigan, 3rd Street Bridge, and the dates, 1886 to 1976. And if you look through there, you can see this is where an actual cable tie rod or support wire came through the wood to help support the bridge. Those are a little taste of reality. The lady that she saw the show, she brought this thing in to show me all of these, and she said, I have one of the benches that they made from the 3rd Street Bridge. Now what happened was, the night the 3rd Street Bridge collapsed, she had come back to visit Bay City for the first time since her childhood. Her brother, who was showing her the city that she grew up, that she was born in but didn't know, took her onto the 3rd Street Bridge and actually was stopped by the bridge being open for a boat passing through. She went through. That next morning, she got on a plane going back home to California. While on the plane, she turned next to her to the man sitting next to her in the airplane, and the headline paper he was reading showed the picture of the 3rd Street Bridge collapse, the same bridge she'd been on the night before. She went home to California. Her brother sent her the newspaper articles. She found out with this article that they were selling pieces of the bridge and had to have one. Bought it, had it sent to California, and she kept it there for 15 years. And then when she returned to Bay City about 10 years ago, she brought it back with her. And when she saw the show, she was so overcome by it and remembering it that she gave me the paperwork and let me buy the bench off of her. So now other people can see it and the paperwork behind it and understand what this furniture meant to Bay City and what the bridge meant to Bay City. That's alternative history. In the second episode, on the 3rd Street Bridge, I thought that I'd said it all, but my close friend and historian and Lake Mariner, Al Flood, showed up one day with pictures and said, "You were pretty good on your shot, except there was another phase in the middle of the progression of the bridge." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, when the wooden bridge was torn down, between that and the steel bridge, they built an iron bridge. So when they mentioned 1876 as the wooden bridge being torn down, an iron bridge was built at that time. And that was the bridge that existed up until 1889 when they took that bridge down and built the steel bridge that we remember with the swing section and the pointed roof. But in this photograph, which has to be prior to 1889, you see the iron bridge. Up in front, now what we are on the east side of the river. We're looking north. Right here is the 3rd Street Bridge, so we're about 3 blocks south, right approximately where 6th Street would be. Right over here to the right is really strange. You can't see the printing, but this tent right here is the Tierney Brothers Saloon. It's actually a saloon in a tent. That was back then. Every other building, every other shack was a bar. There's a shipping office right here. We see a couple gentlemen with the shipping timetable on it. Interesting stuff. We see all the lumber from the mill over here. And in the background, like I said, here is the iron bridge. And now I'm going to show you how we can tell that this is a different bridge. Now in this blow up of the middle section of that last image, we can see the iron bridge. And it's very distinctive. Once you know that you're looking at it, you can see the difference. If you notice, it's a big square iron structure. There's no little house. There's no bridge keeper's house on it with the little pointy roof. It's a swing section, but it's a lot smaller. There's just like a railing on either side. It's distinctively different. And like I said, this was the phase between the wooden bridge that was originally built by McGraw in 1864. And in 1876, 12 years later, that wooden bridge was dismantled and this iron bridge was built in its place. And it existed up until 1889, only 13 years. In the background of this image is really interesting, which links up with the shipyard show we did. That's the Wheeler Yard. In the background, you see the actual Wheeler shipyard at full operation, probably in the mid-1880s, this image was taken. And you can see 2 or 3 ships lined up there because they had sideways slips at the Wheeler shipyard. You remember one of the launches, they were a sideways launch. So this is just a wonderful image, and this is the lost phase of the 3rd Street Bridge, the iron phase. And this is another image of the iron bridge, which is interesting in itself because I only know of one other image that I've seen of the bridge, and that's an image that Al Flood has showing the bridge from street level. So send us your images, folks. If you have any images of this iron bridge and you can't miss it with this big rectangular structure, and you see nothing over here, this was all covered, but at this end, and this is the end they came to 3rd Street on the east side of the river, right here, and you can see there isn't even a cover over it. It's completely, totally different than the steel bridge that we were used to. That's what alternative history does. It uncovers things like this. I only know of 3 images, actual photographs, of the iron bridge phase of the 3rd Street Bridge. This is the only drawing I've seen of it. This is from one of the 3 bird's eyes of Bay City that we have. There's only 3, and they're wonderful tools. Even though they're not photographs and they're not exactly precise to size and whatever, they give you a good idea when you look at the 3 of them about what really was happening in Bay City. So you can see the distinct differences between the iron phase between 1876 and 1889, the iron bridge, and then the steel bridge, which we remember came after. So now the hidden, lost part of the Bay City Bridge history, or one of the lost parts. There still might be more. We might turn up more new realities about the 3rd Street Bridge. That's what alternative history tends to do. It never stops. It's always changing, just like life. You have to remember, the only constant in life is change. The only thing that never changes is the fact that everything's always changing. Written, agended history never changes. Real, alternative history is always changing. Revisiting the industrial brown hoist show, which was, I believe was episode 4. This is one of the things that came out of the woodwork, and will come out of the woodwork when you get folks interested, when you plant that seed, and as the grassroots start growing. Look at this. There's a wonderful framed original image of a Type Z wrecking crane, the Virginian. And you see the title, the world's largest wrecking crane, 200-ton capacity. In fact, it lifted the world record, 401,000 and some odd pounds. And it was made right here in Bay City, by Bay City people, for the world. One of the feedbacks that we got, it was a wonderful feedback, turned up a 1920s industrial brown hoist catalog, showing not only every crane and a description of every crane from the Type A to the Type Z. It also has wonderful artwork because their catalogs went around the world. A lot of the actual cranes that are pictured show the original buildings back in Bay City. And I went through the catalog and we picked out some of those. The south end of the erecting shed, we've seen it several times in our episodes, still existent, and it shows a pile driver. It had just exited the erecting shed and they tested them right at the end and then sent them on their way. And that's what you're seeing right there. The same contours of the buildings that exist today, except it doesn't say Industrial Works on it. We do have another picture, if you remember, where it shows American Hoist on that same building. And this image, which is taken right on Water Street, we can see it. A Type A, that's the Type A crane. We know that because we have the catalog. This is from the catalog. That's a Type A crane. The first crane, I believe, was a 20-ton crane. And what you see here is on Water Street, on the railroad tracks, right on Water Street. Right back here is the original brown hoist building. If you remember the brown hoist show, we showed a bunch of people, the workers standing out in front. That's the building there. This here, behind the crane, is the powerhouse. You can see the stack. And what this crane is doing is loading coal right from the pile here, and then loading it into the boilers, the steam boilers for the powerhouse. And that's what's going on. It's actually a working Type A crane right on Water Street in Bay City, doing its job. And now we're going to do a few specialty cranes, because the catalog not only shows Type A through Type Z, and basically Type A was a 20-ton, and Type Z, the last one, was a monstrous beast that was the largest crane ever produced, and we'll show you an image of that. This specialty train right here is kind of apropos to Bay City because of its lumbering heritage. This, in actuality, made by the brown hoist, is a lumber train. This is a mill train. What you see right here, and the logs were, this was a train that moved right up with the crew that was taking the lumber down right on the tracks, and it was small gauge. You could probably, take the tracks anywhere into the woods, and you literally took the logs up to this thing, and it made boards right there on the spot. And here we see that great machine in action. This is the other side. The last image showed it on the other side, but on this side we can see there's the steam generator, there's the cutting blade over here, and that's, you can see the boards that have been produced are all lined up over here, and in the back, wonderful idea, hooked right up behind the mill train is coal. They just took the coal right out of there, stuck it into right next to there, just shoveled the coal instead of the locomotive was probably on the other side. And this car probably loaded the locomotive with coal for steam, and this car probably loaded the steam generator right here to drive the mill. Just a wonderful idea. What a great idea. Industrial ground hoist, Bay City, Michigan. Now this specialty crane, when I saw it in the catalog, I was just overjoyed to see it. What you're looking at here is what is called a tunnel train. It was built for subways. In fact, expressly, if you look at the side right there, it says Grand Central Terminal. This was built for the New York City subway station. If you notice, it's a wrecking crane. But because it's a tunnel, you can't take those gigantic high wrecking cranes into a tunnel. You notice how the cranes, and they have a crane at both ends, it drives itself. It can go, since it can't turn around, it's a tunnel, you've got a crane at either end. This crane was meant to go down into the subway, to live in the subway systems in New York and clear out wrecks and clear out the track and keep everything moving. Without those, the subway system would have never existed. And it worked so well that industrial ground hoist, which was the only people making cranes on trains, so therefore they're the only ones making these, were requisitioned by places all over the world, from industrial ground hoist, Bay City, Michigan, to crawl through their subways and keep them in order. This was the birthplace of all the cranes, all the cranes ever made at the industrial works and the brown hoist. This is where it all started, right in here. Besides the Columbian Exposition, some of the other things that the Bay City cranes were involved in. We had the Mackinac Bridge in later times. So a police officer going by outside.
Yeah, keep rolling.
And Warner Brothers Studios actually used Bay City cranes on their movie sets to build movie sets. Just for the Panama Canal, 101 Bay City cranes were used.
A few moments ago, we said that the government used 101 shovels. Some of them were left by the French, who, under de Lesseps, builder of the Suez Canal, first started work back in 1882. These, however, are good old American shovels. They are working here just past the sheer face of Culebra at the lowest point of the cut, the very real bottom of the Panama Canal.
Well, we're standing on the corner of Center and Madison. Very historic corner, probably one of the most historic corners in Bay City, Michigan. Across Center Avenue is our county building. Beautiful Art Deco building built in 1933 as a works project for the Great Depression. But our real point of interest today, because we're doing the follow-ups on the Masonic episode, due east across the street from me, we want to show as a focus of interest the space. In that space originally sat the First Baptist Church. This is the First Baptist Church. If you look closely at the image, over here you can see the back wall of the Masonic temple, the consistory part. They called it the Blue Lodge, the original lodge. Here's the First Baptist Church. This was built in 1867. It was the congregation of James Fraser, one of our founding fathers, and a devout Christian. He even taught Sunday school. It was probably the biggest, largest, and most well-founded Christian church in Bay City. Early, 67. To the left of it, you see the front of the Scottish Rite Temple that was built in 1926. As an addendum, it came off the back of the Blue Lodge, or the consistory, the original building, and went out and around. It kind of surrounded the Baptist church. So you had the Scottish Rite at one end and the Blue Lodge at the other end. And in the middle, you had James Fraser's congregational church. Very interesting. Another interesting thing to note about the church is almost every one of the pictures I have, and we have several of them, mentions that this tower here, the large tower, was 180 feet, and the shorter tower was 130 feet. We're going to show you how alternative history can usually pry into the truth a little bit closer than agended written history. And this is the image I was speaking of. This is another image of the First Baptist Church. And this is where you can take, and even in this image, the text that was associated with it mentioned 180 and 130 feet. And I kept looking at this and I said, you know, that's a tall tower, but it sure don't look no 180 feet. So I did a simple exercise. Anybody that has done any work with images, old images and photos, knows that you can take a ruler, find something that's a known space, measure it, and then use it as a rule to find out the lengths or heights of other things. It's a simple thing, and it's foolproof. It always works because things don't change sizes. So if you look at this image, right down on the bottom, you'll see a sign. And it's the sign telling when you go to church and when you don't go to church. And it's at eye level, which in a normal human being, even back then, was about 5 foot, which means the top of the sign was probably at about 6 foot, or within an inch or two either way. It's just standard for signs. And if you take a regular ruler, and I took a regular engineer's ruler, and I measured from the bottom of the sign to the top of the sign, and then used that to juxtapose, and I measured the whole top of the tower. And using that, if that is 6 foot, that tower right there is exactly to the millimeter 130 feet. So what happened, obviously, is that someone made a mistake, and they mentioned that was 180 and that's 130, when in reality that's 130 and this measures to 80 feet. And you can see where the obvious mistake was made, and that's what happens with agended history. That's what happens with written history. Somebody has an agenda, they wanted to talk about how tall the towers were, so they wanted to know big. So when they got 180, even though it wasn't, that's the figure they used. And every other book that shows those figures, was using the figures of the first one that made a mistake. And that's how history runs rampant. Written history, agended history. Reality tells you that agended history is wrong. And alternative history, the reality of taking the images as silent witnesses and using them, tells you the truth.
Well, we're standing in front of the Scottish Rite Masonic Center, Bay City, Michigan. This building was built in 1926. You can see the really neat double-headed Scottish Rite eagle with his triangle or pyramid, whichever you want to call it, with the number 32 in, which is very important to the Masons. It's their top degree. It was very interesting that between the starting of the Bay City Chapter 129, or Lodge 129, of the Free and Accepted Order of Masons, that the time date between the 1861 founding and the 1893 inception of the Blue Lodge was exactly 32 years. If you think about it, this building was built in 1926. If you add the fact that when it was built in 1893, its inception was in 1892, this began in 1926, that's 32 years. And there's the number 32 right in the triangle on the eagle's chest. Now, if you think of it that way and also realize that the Masons' symbolism is everything to the Masons, they even called their original lodge the Symbolic Lodge. There it is, all the symbolisms right there, fellas. Pretty impressive building. Although built in 1893, in the year 1903, that building burned to the ground.
Everything was gone. The two beautiful onion tops there were gone. The tower, which was 114 feet, the original tower was 114 feet. It was gone. The only thing that remained of the entire building from the fire was the front two walls, this wall here and the wall along 6th Street. Everything else has been replaced. And we're looking at the front entrance, which is on 6th Street. You can see the whole of the tower on this one. You can see the two onion domes. Very interesting, in the back, you can see the spires from the First Baptist Church, built in 1867, about 30 years before this was built.
I mentioned that James Fraser, our original founding father, and he platted most of the town, by the way. This was his congregation early on in 1867, one of the first. And although that was 1893, that was James Burney, another one of our founding fathers. We have a few street names named after him. That was James Burney's congregation, and he and Dr. Fitzhugh instrumental in the building of Presbyterian Church. And they called this the Blue Lodge. Why they called it the Blue Lodge, I don't know, because it's obviously red. A member of the Scottish Rite, you had to be a member of the Blue Lodge. To be a member of the Blue Lodge, you did not have to be a member of the Scottish Rite Lodge. To be a Shriner, you had to be a member of both. So it kind of tells you where the priorities were, but you can see where the buildings join, where in 1926 they started adding on the bricks, which is really nice. But again, like I said, this building right here is the legacy of those original 500 members that we covered in that original membership document of Lodge 129 of the Free and Accepted Order of Masons in Bay City in 1893. Remember, that document ended in 1893, and that is the year this was opened. So this is their legacy. And even though they're dead, their legacy lives on. A fascinating, hand-carved red sandstone jewel. And, of course, even though Moorish in flavor and design, it was designed by two of the top Bay City architects, Pratt and Copy, the same folks that did the first Presbyterian church. They're also the same people that designed Bay City Hall, which, if the camera can pan around, we can see a picture of it right down to the south. And this is Benjamin Partridge. In our reinvestigation of the Masonic document that was illustrated in the first episode, I went down the line and I pointed fingers at different names that were the very first members. And member number 4 was Benjamin F. Partridge. This is Benjamin F. Partridge. In 1861, he became a Mason. Also, in 1861, he was the first person to start recruitment for the Civil War. He mustered the first volunteer from Bay City to go to the Civil War. He was, I believe he started out as a lieutenant, but he went off. They fought in several battles. He was wounded at one of the middle battles in the war, 62 or 63. I even have a little blurb, we even have a little blurb in the Bay City newspaper of the time about the hero returning from war. And obviously he went back, because in the Battle of Gettysburg, B.F. Partridge, who was now elevated by that time to a brigadier general. It was either before, maybe after, probably after the battle because of what he did. But he, in command of the Michigan 16th, was instrumental in keeping his men on the field and winning the Battle of Little Round Top. Many people say he was crucial to that part of the battle. And as we all know, Little Round Top won the Battle of Gettysburg, and the winning of the Battle of Gettysburg was basically the end of the South. And the reason, the final lasting shot that won the war for the North. So that puts him in a little bit clearer perspective. That's Benjamin Partridge. Member number 4, Bay City Masons. This is George Shearer. I believe, I don't have the exact numbers because I don't have the book with me right now, but I believe he was member number 44. And he was important for one thing. Besides being a Bay City mayor, he was also the mayor during the 10 hours or no sawdust strike. That was very famous in the 1880s. It was the first, biggest, and probably only lumberman strike in the United States. But anyway, he was the mayor of Bay City during that strike. He was also from the Shearer family. His brother James was the biggest banker in town, and I believe that every bank in town was directly or indirectly owned by the Shearer family, plus half of the businesses in town. And this is an image of William R. McCormick. This is the McCormick that bought the Trombley house from the Trombleys within 4 years after they built it, when they escaped to Banks on the west side to become fishermen, to get away from the mills and the rape of the forest and the killing of the red man. The French loved to marry Indians and to live by running water into fish and to be at one with the land. And they couldn't put up with what the Scotchmen and the Irish and the Englishmen were doing to Bay City on this side of the river. I think he was member 400 and something, if you remember correctly. We pointed him out in the document. The only reason he was later, even though he was one of the founding fathers, he wasn't one of the first members, because he belonged to a different chapter earlier, and he came to this chapter later in life. In the 1870s, he wrote the definitive history of Bay City. The McCormick Diary is one of the definitive hands-on histories of Bay City, quoted in all the history books, which, you know, like I said, though, you've got to take that with a grain of salt, but this is the guy that started. If there's myths and rumors out there, this man started most of them.
Okay, I've had a lot of viewers ask me what happened to the document that you had in the Masonic show. A lot of people want to see it.
It's safe.
It's safe.
It's safe. There's been a lot of people trying to find out where it is, and it's safe. It's in a safe place. We are trying mightily to get it where it belongs. That document belongs in the Masonic temple. That's where it belongs. But before it gets there, it's going to have to be proven. A repository will be a proper repository before we're going to relinquish it.
Is it true that the person who found it in a dumpster?
I'm not going to answer that. I will say one thing and one thing only. The person that brought it to me rescued it. And if he wouldn't have rescued it, it would have been lost forever.
Okay, but just to clear it up, he didn't steal the document.
The document was not stolen. It was rescued from total oblivion. It would have been gone. I'm not going to come out and say it was rescued out of the trash. I'm only going to say that it was rescued. As a kind of a cleanup, I wanted to mention a few facts that I hadn't mentioned earlier. When we were around on the other side and we were showing the open space where the Baptist church used to be and the relationship of it and the Scottish Rite and the Blue Lodge here, I mentioned the kind of mythology about Christian and Masonic togetherness, you know, the fact that they were both in the same block, very close neighbors and associates too, I'm sure. But even business-wise, if you remember, we mentioned Benjamin Partridge, member number 4. Well, he not only was a Mason, he was also very closely tied up with James Burney, the founder of the Congregational Church across the street, who was one of our original founding fathers. B.F. Partridge, along with Mr. Burney, went to Lansing in 1857 to try and get countyhood for Bay City. Curtis Munger, member number 7, opened up the first salt company in Bay City in 1861. It was called the Bay City Salt Company, and he was in business with William McCormick, who was a Mason. You know, Curtis Munger was with Dr. Fitzhugh and with James Burney and James Frazier. They were in business in these salt companies. So there was a lot of communication between these Christians and the Masons in this area, not just economically, but physically. They were physical neighbors, so they had to get along. So maybe a little bit of alternative history will clear up a little bit of the mythology also involved in that.
Hello, my name is Raymond Naj. I'm an alternative historian from Bay City, Michigan, and I invite you to send all of your photographs, all of your memories, all of whatever it is that you can remember about Bay City and its past that you might think important to us as we uncover Bay City's alternative history. History.